What's up there, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin coming to you from the Big Blue Nation once again, and today I was going to talk to you about Chlorophytum comosum. A lot of you probably known it as the spider plant, the airplane plant, St. Bernard's lily, spider ivy, and the ribbon plant. I've even heard some people call it a hen and chicks, but I know a succulent that's called a hen and chicks, so I won't call it the hen and chicks. This is a species of perennial flowering plant that's native to southern and tropical Africa and around the southern Pacific Ocean. In fact, I believe there are 191 different species at last count for this plant. A lot of the popular ones are the variegated ones. Now, this plant has been grown as a house plant for well over 200 years. I know this plant has been fairly popular as a house plant in America for a long time. And in fact, when you mention popular houseplants in America, the Chlorophytum comosum is one that kind of pops in my mind. I know a lot of you probably got grandparents or aunts and uncles who have this plant. It's a very beautiful looking plant. I've never been one for the variegated types. I didn't like the kind of green and cream, kind of whitish color. I didn't think it really looked that pretty at all. And then I found this one. This one's actually called the Hawaiian spider plant, and it's actually a fairly green plant. It's got beautiful shades of dark green on the outsides of the leaves, and on the inside it's kind of got a lighter greener color stripe. And unfortunately, the rest of America doesn't really agree with that, because the Hawaiian spider plants or the regular ones that are just a kind of darker green color only make up about 10% of sales here in America. Another surprising fact about this plant is it's a hardy plant celebrated by the ASPCA. This plant is non-toxic to humans, dogs, and cats. And in fact, you can actually eat this plant. It is edible. You can kind of take the younger leaves that aren't as tough and kind of boil them or microwave them and kind of steam them, and they are edible. They kind of make a good additive to a salad. They're high in protein, beta-carotene, powerful antioxidants, and vitamin C also. So a lot of people around the world kind of eat this plant, and in fact, if you grow a lot of it, you could probably eat it yourself. I will not actually eat mine, though it is pretty enough to be eaten. Another reason why this plant has been a very popular houseplant for such a long time is because they can tolerate pretty much any kind of conditions that we humans throw at them. When we bring them into our house, they can tolerate a wide range of temperatures. They don't like to be colder than 45 degrees if they don't have to, though. And actually, I wouldn't really suggest putting this plant any lower than like 55 degrees. They can handle pretty extreme heat, though they don't really do too well over 90, 95 degrees. And in fact, if you have it outside, I wouldn't put it anywhere where they could get hit by the afternoon day sun. These plants, they can also grow in almost any kind of lighting condition as well. Now, they do best at kind of a bright indirect light, and they do well at any kind of light except for direct sunlight. So if you have this plant in a window, I'll suggest putting it in kind of a southern facing window with kind of some curtains, or maybe an eastern or western facing window that's kind of just right up in that windowsill. And in fact, these plants also do really well in artificial lighting. So you'll often see these plants in office spaces and places like that, not just in the house. And they do well under fluorescent light, and the plant will be just fine. Now, with the water, you want to keep the soil fairly moist from the spring to the autumn, and let it get slightly drier during the winter times. Now, if you do allow the soil to dry out completely for an extended period of time, no matter which growing season it is, the leaves can actually develop kind of brown permanent tips at the end. They won't go away, and you'll actually have to cut those off. So make sure that the plant does dry out a little bit, but as soon as it does start to dry out, you want to kind of moisten it again. And you can even go ahead, if it's in the spring, summer, or autumn, you can probably go ahead and just full on water it and let some of the excess water drain out the bottom. But when it gets to be about the winter time, you do want to actually let it dry out a little bit more than you would during any other time of the year.
Several years ago, NASA did a study on which houseplants were going to be better for air purification, and I believe it was the Spathiphyllum, the peace lily, that took first place, but the spider plant actually did second best.
Now with the feeding, I've heard a bunch of different things. So the feeding kind of just varies really. I've heard some people say during the growing seasons that you want to actually feed this plant just about every time that you water it. Then I've also heard people say that you want to feed it about once every week to every 2 weeks. And then I've heard people also say that you want to kind of feed it about once a month. Now feeding it every time you water it seems a bit excessive and can actually cause a bunch of the salts and everything to build up in the soil and probably burn your plant out. Now on the other end, kind of feeding it once a month is kind of on the lower end, and the plant probably won't do as well. Now I know you've all seen the beautiful arcing stems that come off of these so that they can actually create their little plant babies. After all, that's what the spider plant is known for. So it does take a lot of energy for these plants to be able to produce these babies, so they do need a good amount of feeding, and they are a foliage plant as well, so they will like a lot of nitrogen. And on another side note, these plants won't produce any babies until they are mature. Now if you've still got a mature plant and it's not producing any babies, you might want to take a look at its space. If the plant does feel pretty confined, it won't produce hardly any babies at all. So it does need a little bit of room whenever you're going to let it kind of grow out some. And then with the fertilizer, you can use any standard liquid fertilizer about once every 1 to 2 weeks during the growing season. And in the wintertime, you don't need to feed the plant any at all because the plant is dormant. Now, as I was kind of saying with temperatures, you do not want to let this plant go lower than 45 degrees. If it doesn't have to, 45 is actually the minimum, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And as I was saying, the maximum is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So anything after that will kind of leave the plant feeling a little bit dry and wilted and losing some water. Plants can actually get maybe a couple degrees lower than 45, but not for any length of time really. You want to keep that exposure to a bare minimum because these plants will not survive any freezing temperatures whatsoever. They will not bounce back from that. That is actually a death sentence for them. Now with propagating, these plants are fairly easy to propagate. You can actually kind of split it right down the middle of the rosette in the middle. If you were to take this plant out of its pot, you could take a spade and just kind of split it in two. You'll lose a couple of leaves and roots that way, but the plant will just be fine and you'll just have two separate plants. Now the roots with these plants, they are fairly fleshy and thick, so they might give you a little bit of a problem when splitting. In fact, the easiest way to propagate these plants is by taking the little arcs that they produce, and you can cut those off and stick those in dampened soil, or you can cut those off and stick them in a glass of water, and then those will produce roots. Now these plants will kind of produce roots at a faster pace if you leave the arcs intact to the mother plant and just let that kind of pin it down in some damp soil. And you can actually take a bent paper clip and use that to kind of pin the arcs down and place the baby plant in some damp soil, and it'll actually produce roots fairly quickly. In about 7 to 10 days you can go ahead and separate that stem, and you'll have another little smaller plant as well. Now generally speaking, more sun will produce kind of a more pronounced variegation in the striped varieties and a darker green kind of color in the solid ones. So light does play an important role, and I know I was saying that it doesn't really matter what kind of light you kind of put it in, as long as it's not a direct sunlight, but you will get it to actually grow bigger and more babies and flower actually more the more sunlight you have, and the color for the plant will actually look a lot better too. Lighting effects also affect the blooming and the reproduction of the plant, as I just said. Plants kept in a brighter light tend to produce more flowers and more offspring than those kind of kept in a dimmer area. Now on the other end of the spectrum, plants kept in too bright a light will actually cause the plant to scorch and kind of burn the leaves, and will actually kind of kill the plant as well. So you kind of want to find that happy medium when it comes to these light sources for these plants. And don't forget, whenever you're placing this plant anywhere in the house, that this plant does kind of come from the tropical areas of southern Africa. So whenever you're placing it, don't set it next to a cold window where it can change drastically through the night and actually make the plant a little bit colder. And then on the other hand of that, don't put it next to a vent where it's going to receive a sharp blast of heat through the night as well, because that will dry the plant out and keep it unhappy, and it won't produce any babies, flowers, and it probably will just die. Now the ideal temperature for a plant is about anywhere from 70 to about 90 degrees. Anything kind of lower than that won't kill the plant. In fact, a plant kept at about a constant 65 degrees Fahrenheit will live nicely, but it won't produce any flowers and it won't produce any kind of pups really either. So it will live, but it won't perform. Now this is a newer plant, but I used to have one of the variegated kinds, and I found that the African violet kind of soil mix does really well for these plants as well. And in fact, if you can help it, maybe feed them a little bit of bone meal or something like that, something that will kind of actually help raise the acidity levels for these plants. They do like it on the slightly kind of acidic side, with a pH anywhere from 6.0 to 6.5. So that's not a strong acidity, but they do like a little bit of acidity to their soil as well. Well now gang, I hope you actually like this video. I'm going to kind of keep you updated with this plant since this is one of the newer ones. And I will show you what will happen in a couple of months as it does start to produce its pups. Hopefully, you know, it'll get bigger. This plant is in, I think, an 8-inch pot, so it does have a little bit of room for it to expand a little bit. But other than that, I think it's going to be beautiful. I really like that kind of dark green versus the lighter green composition of the leaves, and I do like the foliage plants as well. And this plant is a foliage plant. Now pests, they kind of don't really have a lot in the way of pests. I think the only thing I've kind of seen with these guys is aphids. So you kind of want to watch your soil. You don't want it to be anything that's saturated for a long period of time, because aphids will have a field day with that, and they will run rampant. So if you do find that you have a problem with aphids on this plant, you can actually get what I get, something called gnat nix. Cover up the top inch of the soil. It's superheated glass, and you just put it up on the soil for about a ½ inch, and anything that's in the soil won't actually be able to come out, because the gnat nix will actually puncture their exoskeleton and kill the insect. So anything that's laying underneath the soil won't be able to come out, and if it does, it'll die. And anything that's kind of above the plant, once it settles on the gnat nix or tries to go through it, it will die as well. So this gnat nix is a really good thing to have if you've kind of got any problems with any kind of pests that live in the soil. The only problem with gnat nix is that when you go to water it, it is kind of a sand kind of quality, so it's very lightweight, and if you go to water it, it will move it around a little bit. You can just kind of take your finger and kind of mush it back into place, or just kind of move the bowl around a little bit and kind of shake it or blow it or whatever. It is kind of worth its weight in gold. And also, you don't want to breathe in gnat nix, because it can actually settle in your lungs. But to avoid that, all you need to do is really just kind of turn your ceiling fan on high when you're kind of putting it into your soil. Just use a little cup and kind of pour it down in there, and then any of the dust will kind of circulate through your room, and you can kind of cover your mouth up with a mask or a cloth or a t-shirt or something like that while you put it on there, and then you can kind of add more as you need it, and it'll keep any kind of pest that you have out of the soil and down in from the roots. So, well guys, just hit that like button for me if you don't mind, and leave me a comment. Let me know if you guys had any kind of luck with these plants and what your favorite one is. Like I said, I don't really care too much for the variegated ones. I didn't really like that cream color, so I found one that I actually liked. This plant is a really popular houseplant in America, and I really wanted one. I don't really have too many hanging plants, though I do have a couple, and this is one that you kind of have to have because it is a beaut. So yeah, just let me know if you've had any kind of success or failures with the plant. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I was saying, I hope you guys have a good life, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you all. Happy holidays.